Welcome everyone to our first Stream S build on the channel. Jay actually did a video on this case a few months ago. This is our smallest case, it's ITX, and it is a little bit of follow-on from Wraith, but only because it's replacing Wraith. It doesn't have anything at all from Wraith. It's a completely new case from the ground up. Different layout, different position for the power board and for the distribution plate. But the idea of this case is that it is for compact high-end water cooling. So it's as small as you can go without stacking the radiators on top of the components. So, without putting like a radiator in front of the motherboard and really starting to ruin the aesthetics of a water-cooled build. So if you're going to build like a high-end water-cooled system into an SFF case, you don't want to be completely destroying the aesthetics. If we took another step beyond this and said we want to build the smallest water-cooled case, then this case would be very different. It would have a very different layout. It's designed to still be aesthetically pleasing. So you can see that the power board looks very different from any of our other power boards, and that is because it actually sits vertically next to the motherboard, and this is for space saving. We have very limited space. It also directly connects to the power supply, so you don't need cables between the power supply and the power board. What that means is that you are limited to a certain power supply series, and this is a decision that we made because we wanted to try this out. What we are trying to do with the power board, we are working towards a future vision and idea, and this has to be done step by step because the industry standards, I don't want to sound arrogant here, but it needs to kind of catch up to the idea. Or there are multiple different ways that we could work around this. Like we could just go ahead and build our own, design our own power supply. We could collaborate with somebody else to design a power supply. Maybe the power board becomes a big enough idea where other companies start designing power supplies for it. So if you're going to work towards a vision, you have to kind of present the different ideas to make this vision happen. And this is one of them. But what this means is that you're limited with power supplies, and so we chose a power supply series that suits the kind of build that our customers are going to be building. So the Asus ROG Loki, high-end, very reliable, nice power supplies, and this one is the 1000 watt. The other reason we selected this power supply series is because there are quite a few options in the series. There is a 750 watt, 850, 1000. There is a 1200, but this came out after the power board was developed, so the power board is not compatible with the 1200. You can see that once you install the power board onto the power supply, and something I should mention, and this goes for all connectors, you need to make sure that they are properly plugged in. 8-pin PCI as well. It's not just 12VH power. We have seen 8-pin PCIe melt from very, very occasionally, but from not plugging it in properly. If you leave cables a millimeter unplugged, it is definitely going to reduce the lifespan of whatever they're plugged into. It's going to potentially cause problems. So very quick, cheap insurance policies just to make sure all of those are plugged in. Double check, triple check, or after you've done your cable management, you've pulled everything into position, check everything is plugged in again. And if you can see like a 0.5 millimeter gap, that is a problem. Plug it in all the way. And it's particularly important with this power board because you're plugging in a lot of connectors at the same time. So yeah, just push it in very firmly, check from one side, check from the other side. So you can see that the power board actually fits vertically in between the 240 millimeter radiator, which is mounted onto the back next to the motherboard, and the motherboard itself. The power supply is actually on adjustable rails, so you can slide it backwards and forwards. And this is for compatibility because different radiators have different widths, and maybe you want to run cables down the side or something, so you need a bit more of a gap on one side or the other. But the gap between the power board and the radiator is very small. It's under 10 millimeters, and then between the motherboard and the power board, it's almost touching. So very tight. We really made this case as small as we could, again, as I said, without stacking radiators in front of the motherboard and or GPU. We wanted a nice vertically mounted GPU that you can see the entire GPU water block, to be able to see the entire motherboard area as well, and to have a layout that you can create some very nice aesthetics with. Now, something else that we did, we have been making these FPC cables for some time now. So this is a replacement for wires, and I have never actually explained the idea behind these cables. They actually are the equivalent of 16 gauge wire, so the performance, the power delivery is really not an issue with these cables. But the whole idea behind them is eliminating wires, moving forward from custom cables. Like, I know, as attached as I was and as people are to custom cables, it is something that I think is going to be a thing of the past, and there are many reasons for that. But one is certainly that I can think of many better things to do with my time than sitting there braiding cables, which take, for one kit of cables for one build, an entire day to make a single kit. It's something that I would certainly rather be moving away from, and that's why we are presenting all of these alternative solutions. Now, the thing about FPC cables is that they are extremely thin and compact, and so in a small form factor case, it is quite an amazing thing to have. If you had, just imagine if you had cables in this case, where would you actually put them? Where would you put stock PSU cables or even custom cables? So obviously they would have to run over the tops of the components. And if you were very good with your custom cable building, which is very time consuming, very expensive, you might be able to make some nice looking cables in this case. They'd kind of all be out in midair. Either that, or we'd have to build a cable management compartment out the back, and they'd all have to go out there, and then the case would have to become a lot larger. So you can see how much space and how simple the Powerboard is making things, and how everything is connected down the middle. There is no cable management to be done. Everything just gets plugged in. So it literally took minutes to just install the core components. I think about probably 15 minutes to get them all bolted in there, and then another maybe 10 minutes to get the Powerboard in and all of the cables plugged into the Powerboard. And that's it. I don't have to spend a whole day building custom cables to perfection for this case. And why I say to perfection is because perfection is really required. I mean, in my opinion, for any build, but certainly for SFF, we have very limited space. It's the kind of situation where you should really be building different wire lengths for every strand to get your cable curves perfect. But coming back to FPCs, they're like less than a millimeter thick, so they're taking up very little space. You can fold them back out of the way, as you can see I've done with these. You can just tuck them in, and even in a big Spectre build or something, having FPCs means that you can hardly even see them. You can actually just tuck the excess and push it underneath the motherboard, and you can't see any wires. All you can see is this thing, a few, like maybe 20 millimeters of it, and it's plugged into both of the 24 pin connectors on the motherboard and on the Powerboard. So I have to demonstrate this coming up in a bigger build. If you look closely, you can see that as I'm filling the loop here, I'm switching a switch on and off at the top of the Powerboard. This is actually a power supply jump starter. So normally, I highly recommend that you do not boot the system to fill your loop. You need to have a separate power supply for the pump, or if you're going to use your main power supply, you have to have everything disconnected, and you have to have a power supply jump starter. But we've started building into our Powerboards a power supply jump starter, which you can just run the pump from. And it was actually necessary for Stream S because you can't get to the pump power connection anymore once the GPU is installed. At least it's not easy. You kind of have to reach down underneath the GPU, and it's very tight. So it just makes filling a whole lot easier. Like, one of the main reasons I don't suggest booting your system to fill the loop, aside from potential damage, if there's a leak, the components are then powered, it's a bigger problem. You shouldn't switch your system on and off while it's trying to post. That could cause issues. And you're going to have less control over the pump, and you don't want the pump to suck air for too long. You don't want it to run dry, completely dry at all, because it's going to burn out the pump very quickly. So there's a lot of reasons that you need to have a way of jump starting the pump, running the pump on its own. So on the back here, we have some custom UV printing, and this is something that we're just starting to offer now. Like, we have a product page for it. We've been doing it for a while, but we haven't advertised it or really told anyone about it. But depending on where you put it, it actually glows, and on this case it glows very well. The case is constructed from CNC machine components, as usual with our cases, 3mm folded aluminium, which is anodized, and also 10mm and 6mm acrylic for the distribution plate, and then 10mm acrylic for the top and bottom panels. And I will make a video on the durability of acrylic soon, because it seems to have developed a bit of a reputation. There are certain things you need to know about it, like don't use alcohol to clean it, but its surface durability is basically the same as automotive paint. So if it scratches your car, it's going to scratch acrylic, but acrylic is actually more repairable. So you can see that we can fit full-length GPUs into this case. This is the Asus TUF 4090, and there is still quite a bit of room there for a longer GPU, and that's why we did this layout with the 240mm radiator mounted next to the motherboard and a distribution plate on the front. And the distro is kind of critical in this case for liquid cooling, because where would you fit a traditional tube pump res combo? It would be extremely cramped kind of above the GPU, and you'd have so much trouble tubing it all up. It would be quite messy. So that is the benefit and the purpose of the integration. The Powerboard saving a lot of space, cable mess, and a lot of difficulty and time making custom cables. And the distribution plate pump res combo integration really making this possible to fit this amount of higher end components into a case of this size.